Queen Elizabeth was one of the most powerful and carefully controlled rulers in English history, yet the details of her death remain unclear for more than 400 years. When she died in 1603, there was no official medical explanation recorded. No doctor was allowed to examine her body, and no postmortem was performed. This silence created a mystery that historians, doctors, and writers have debated for centuries. People wonder whether she died naturally or whether something darker was involved. Some believed she was poisoned. Others thought she gave up on life due to grief and exhaustion. These questions grew stronger over time because Elizabeth had spent her entire reign controlling her image. Even in death, she refused to allow anyone to look too closely. Her final decision to block an autopsy was not random. It was a final act of control meant to protect the powerful image she had created. Over the years, myths replaced facts. Stories spread across Europe, especially among her enemies, claiming her body decayed unnaturally fast or that it burst open in the coffin. At the time, these tales were dismissed as propaganda. However, modern science has shown that such events can happen when the body is weakened by disease or poisoning. Still, without physical evidence, nothing could be proven. Elizabeth's death remained a puzzle locked in time. But in recent years, historians and medical experts have returned to this mystery with new tools. By studying her lifestyle, her medical symptoms, and historical records, experts have finally been able to explain not only how she died, but why her final years were filled with so much suffering. The truth that emerged was not dramatic in the way people expected. There was no murder plot or secret assassin. Instead, the answer revealed a deeply human story of pain, pride, and silent endurance behind one of history's greatest queens. When Elizabeth I came to the throne in 1558, she was only 25 years old, and England was deeply unstable. The country had just endured religious violence under her half-sister Mary Tudor, and many people doubted whether a woman could rule alone. Foreign powers like Spain and France saw her as weak, while nobles inside England questioned her legitimacy. Elizabeth quickly understood that survival depended not just on good decisions, but on how she was seen. In a world ruled by men, image was power. She could not rely on physical strength or military experience. So she turned herself into a symbol. She crafted the identity of the Virgin Queen, a ruler married only to her country. This image gave her independence and authority. Elizabeth carefully managed every detail of how she appeared in public. She dressed in rich clothing, wore symbolic jewelry, and controlled how artists painted her. She allowed only portraits that showed her as young, calm, and powerful. Any image that suggested aging or weakness was destroyed. Over time, her face became less human and more symbolic. This was not vanity. It was strategy. Elizabeth understood that if people believed she was strong and timeless, they would obey her. She turned herself into an idea rather than just a person. This control extended to every part of her public life. She censored books, controlled theater performances, and punished criticism. England did not just have a queen. It had a living symbol of stability. But behind this carefully constructed mask, Elizabeth was still human. Her body aged, her health declined, and her emotions suffered. The same control that kept her powerful also trapped her. She could not show weakness, even when she was in pain. This decision would eventually cost her dearly, especially as her health began to fail in her later years. One of the most famous features of Elizabeth I's appearance was her pale white face. This look was created using a cosmetic known as Venetian ceruse, a mixture made mainly from white lead and vinegar. In the 16th century, pale skin was a sign of wealth and nobility because it showed a person did not work outdoors. For Elizabeth, this makeup did much more than enhance beauty. It helped her appear pure, untouched, and almost supernatural. However, this cosmetic was extremely dangerous. Lead is a toxic metal, and repeated exposure can slowly poison the body. Elizabeth used Venetian ceruse almost daily for decades. At first, the damage was hidden, but after she survived smallpox in 1562, the disease left scars on her face. To cover them, she used even heavier layers of makeup. Over time, her face was said to be covered in makeup, so thick it looked like porcelain. While this helped her hide scars and aging, it also allowed lead to enter her body through her skin. Slowly and silently, the poison built up in her system. Modern medical knowledge shows that long-term lead exposure can cause hair loss, weak teeth, swelling, confusion, fatigue, and emotional instability. Many of these symptoms appeared in Elizabeth's later life. Her hair thinned, forcing her to wear wigs. Her teeth decayed badly. Her mood became unstable, and she suffered from exhaustion. At the time, no one understood the danger. Cosmetics were not tested, and beauty often came at a cost. Elizabeth believed she was protecting her image, but instead, she was harming herself. The mask that made her look powerful was slowly destroying her health. This hidden damage would weaken her body and make her unable to fight off illness when it finally struck. As Elizabeth grew older, her personal world began to shrink. Many of the people she trusted most died before her. Her closest advisor, William Cecil, passed away in 1598. Francis Walsingham, who had protected her through intelligence and spies, died earlier. Friends who had stood beside her during the most dangerous years of her reign were gone. Even emotionally, Elizabeth became increasingly isolated. She never married and had no children. While this decision kept her power secure, it also meant she faced old age alone. One of the deepest emotional wounds came from Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. Elizabeth had shown him rare affection, but when he led a failed rebellion in 1601, she was forced to sign his execution order. This decision haunted her. Witnesses later claimed she cried when speaking of executions, including that of Mary, Queen of Scots. Whether these stories are fully true or not, they show a woman weighed down by regret. In her final years, Elizabeth withdrew from public life. She spoke less and refused help from attendants. She stopped allowing doctors to treat her. She rejected food, medicine, and even her bed, choosing instead to sit for hours in silence. This behavior suggests deep emotional exhaustion. Some believed she had lost a will to live. Combined with her physical pain, the emotional strain overwhelmed her. The queen who once ruled with confidence now appeared fragile behind closed doors. Her refusal to accept help worsened her condition. In a time when medicine was already limited, rejecting care made survival even harder. Elizabeth's strength, which had defined her reign, became the very thing that trapped her in suffering by the final months of her life. Elizabeth's health had clearly collapsed. Her teeth had rotted badly, turning black and causing painful abscesses in her gums and jaw. These infections would have caused constant pain and made eating difficult. Her glands became swollen and filled with pus. Her skin turned gray and was covered in sores. Her hands and feet swelled, showing serious circulation problems. Years of untreated dental infections may have allowed bacteria to spread through her body. Combined with lead poisoning from cosmetics, her immune system was severely weakened. Witnesses describe her as thin, exhausted, and barely able to move. She struggled to breathe and became increasingly fatigued. One of the most disturbing signs was her coronation ring. She had worn it since 1559, but near the end, her finger had swollen so badly that the ring cut into her flesh and could not be removed without injury. Despite all this, no one dared openly admit she was dying. Her attendants whispered in fear, afraid to upset her. Elizabeth herself refused to acknowledge weakness. She stopped sleeping in a bed, believing that lying down would mean death. This level of fear and denial suggests she knew the end was near but could not face it. Her need for control remained stronger than her need for comfort. This made her final days not just painful, but tragic. She suffered in silence, surrounded by people who were too afraid to help her properly on March 24th, 1603. Queen Elizabeth I died at Richmond Palace at the age of 69. There were no final words, no public farewell, and no explanation. Her death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty. James VI of Scotland soon became James I of England, uniting the crowns. While the transition of power was smooth, the silence surrounding Elizabeth's death left room for rumors to grow. Some claimed her body decomposed rapidly and released foul gases inside the coffin. Others believed she had been poisoned or that she chose to starve herself to death. Without medical records or an autopsy, these stories could not be proven or dismissed. Catholic enemies spread dark tales to damage her legacy. For centuries, historians debated the truth. Medical knowledge at the time was too limited to offer real answers. diseases were poorly understood, and poison was often blamed for unexplained deaths. Elizabeth's strict control, even in death, ensured that the truth will remain hidden for generations. But history did not forget her. As science advanced, experts realized that old records could still reveal medical truths. Even without a body to examine that in modern times, historians and medical experts returned to Elizabeth's death using new methods. In the television series Royal Autopsy, specialists reviewed historical documents, eyewitness accounts, and medical descriptions of her symptoms. While no DNA sample existed, experts used forensic modeling and biological analysis to reconstruct her health. Pathologists studied descriptions of her dental problems, swelling, breathing difficulty, and fatigue. These signs pointed towards serious infection. Long-term lead exposure explained many of her chronic symptoms, but it was not the final cause of death. The experts concluded that Elizabeth suffered from bronchial pneumonia. This infection caused fluid to fill her lungs, leading to respiratory failure. As the infection spread, it likely developed into sepsis, where bacteria entered the bloodstream. Her weakened body could not fight it. Heart failure may also have played a role. Pneumonia, a disease easily treated today, became deadly in an era without antibiotics. This answer surprised many. It was not dramatic, but it was honest. Elizabeth did not die from murder or poison. She died from a common illness made fatal by years of untreated pain, emotional stress, and toxic exposure. The true tragedy of Elizabeth's death is not how she died, but how long she suffered before it happened. For years, she endured pain without relief. Dental infections, lead poisoning, emotional isolation, and exhaustion slowly destroyed her strength. Her refusal to accept help, driven by pride and fear, made everything worse. The queen who ruled an empire could not allow herself to be seen as weak. In doing so, she paid a terrible price. The medical findings did not reduce her legacy. Instead, they made her more human. They showed the cost of power and the danger of hiding pain behind image. Elizabeth's death was quiet, painful, and lonely. It was the opposite of the glorious image she created, but it revealed the truth behind the legend. Elizabeth I remains one of the most studied rulers in history. Her reign shaped England's future, strengthened its identity, and influenced culture, politics, and religion. She understood that nations are built on stories as much as laws. By controlling her image, she maintained unity in dangerous times. But the same control isolated her and trapped her behind a mask she could never remove. Her story is remembered not just for victory, but for sacrifice. She chose power over comfort, control over openness, and image over health. These choices made her immortal in history, but they also caused immense personal suffering. The mystery of Elizabeth I's death no longer belongs to rumor and fear. Modern science has given us a clear answer. She died of pneumonia, but she lived for years in silent agony. This truth does not weaken her legacy. It strengthens it. It reminds us that even the strongest rulers are human. Elizabeth's life was a balance between brilliance and pain, control and sacrifice. Her death stripped away the myth and revealed the woman beneath the crown. And that is why, more than 4 centuries later, the Virgin Queen continues to fascinate the world. The reason Queen Elizabeth I's death continues to matter today is not only because she was a powerful ruler, but because her story reflects a problem that still exists in modern life. Elizabeth lived in a world where showing weakness could destroy authority. As a result, she learned to hide pain, deny illness, and maintain control at all costs. This mindset helped her rule successfully for decades, but also trapped her inside a role she could never escape. Even when her body was failing, she refused help because admitting weakness would have shattered the image she had spent a lifetime building. This struggle between public strength and private suffering is something people still recognize today, especially leaders, celebrities, and public figures who feel pressure to appear perfect at all times. Elizabeth's life shows how dangerous that pressure can become when it prevents people from seeking care or expressing pain. Her death also reminds us how far medical science has advanced. Diseases like pneumonia, dental infections, and lead poisoning were deadly in her time, but today they are treatable or preventable. What killed Elizabeth was not a rare or mysterious illness, but a combination of common problems made fatal by neglect and lack of medical knowledge. This makes her story even more tragic. A woman who survived assassination plots, foreign threats, and religious conflict was ultimately defeated by conditions modern medicine could easily handle. Historians now see her death as a warning about the cost of endurance without compassion. Elizabeth believed that suffering in silence was part of leadership. She believed that showing pain would weaken the state. But modern understanding suggests the opposite. A ruler, like any human, needs care, rest, and support. By refusing these things, Elizabeth shortened her own life. Her story challenges the idea that strength means never breaking. Instead, it suggests that true strength may lie in knowing when to accept help. This shift in perspective is one reason her death continues to be studied. It is not just a historical event, but a lesson in human limits. Elizabeth I became immortal through control, but she died because she could not let go of it. That contradiction is what makes her story timeless. 400 years later, people are still drawn to her life not just because she ruled well, but because she paid such a high personal price for doing so. Teal fully understand why Queen Elizabeth I suffered so greatly in her final years. It is important to understand how limited medical knowledge was during the Tudor period. Doctors in the 16th century did not understand germs, bacteria, or viruses. They believed illness was caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids known as humors, or by bad air, called miasma. Treatments were often painful and ineffective. Bloodletting, herbal mixtures, and mercury-based medicines were common, and many of them caused more harm than good. Even skilled physicians had no way to treat infections properly. Antibiotics did not exist, and simple conditions like tooth abscesses or lung infections could easily become fatal. Elizabeth's severe dental problems alone could have killed her. An untreated tooth infection can spread into the jaw, neck, and bloodstream, causing sepsis. In her time, there was no way to stop this once it began. Pain relief was also limited. Opium was sometimes used, but dosing was dangerous and inconsistent. As a result, many people, including the Queen, lived with constant pain. Lead poisoning was another silent danger. Lead was widely used in cosmetics, medicine, pipes, and cookware. No one understood its long-term effects. Elizabeth's daily use of lead-based makeup slowly weakened her body, but doctors would not have recognized the cause. Symptoms like fatigue, confusion, hair loss, and swelling would have been blamed on aging or stress. This medical ignorance meant that Elizabeth's decline appeared mysterious and unstoppable to those around her, even if she had accepted treatment. There was little doctors could do. However, her refusal of care made things worse. She dismissed physicians, avoided bathing, and stopped eating properly. This behavior weakened her immune system further. In modern medicine, emotional health is closely linked to physical health. Depression, grief, and isolation can lower resistance to disease. Elizabeth experienced all of these. She lost trusted companions, faced deep regret, and carried the weight of an entire nation alone. Without understanding mental health, her attendants saw her behavior as stubbornness or fear. Today, we recognize it as emotional collapse. This lack of medical and psychological knowledge turned Elizabeth's final illness into a slow and painful decline. Her death was not sudden. It was a result of years of untreated damage. Tudor medicine was simply not prepared to save a woman who had sacrificed her health for power. This context helps explain why pneumonia, which might seem ordinary today, became deadly for the Queen. Her body had already been weakened by years of silent suffering. Medical ignorance did not just fail Elizabeth at the end of her life. It shaped the entire experience of her decline, turning what might have been manageable conditions into a fatal chain of events. Queen Elizabeth I did not rule in a vacuum. Her decisions, her behavior, and even her suffering were deeply shaped by the fact that she was a woman ruling in a male-dominated world. From the moment she took the throne, her authority was questioned in ways that male rulers rarely experienced. Many believed a woman could not rule without a husband. Foreign leaders expected her to marry quickly and surrender power to a king. Elizabeth refused. She understood that marriage would limit her control and expose England to foreign influence. This choice strengthened her authority, but it also increased the pressure on her to appear flawless. She could not afford mistakes, weakness, or public illness. Any sign of fragility would confirm the fears of those who doubted female rule. As a result, Elizabeth pushed herself harder than most rulers. She worked relentlessly, traveled despite illness, and appeared in public even when she was in pain. She crafted an image of strength not just for political reasons, but for survival. This burden followed her into old age. A male king might have been allowed to retire from public life or rely on heirs. Elizabeth had no such option. Without a husband or children, she alone represented stability. Her body became the state. If she weakened, the country felt vulnerable. This belief made it impossible for her to step back. It also explains her obsession with youth and beauty. Aging in a woman was seen as a loss of value, while aging in a man often increased respect. Elizabeth fought this double standard by freezing her image in time. Her white makeup, wigs, and control portraits were tools of resistance as much as vanity. However, this resistance came at a cost. By denying her aging body, she denied her self-care. She internalized the idea that leadership required sacrifice without complaint. This mindset isolated her emotionally and physically. Even her closest attendants were kept at a distance. She trusted no one fully, because trust could be used against her. Over time, this constant vigilance exhausted her. In modern terms, Elizabeth lived under extreme psychological pressure for more than 4 decades. There was no rest, no safe space, and no permission to fail. Her final withdrawal from public life can be seen as the result of years of suppressed stress. When her health collapsed, it collapsed completely. Understanding Elizabeth's death requires understanding the gendered expectations that shaped her life. She was not just a ruler who suffered. She was a woman forced to prove her strength every day in a world that expected her to fail. Her silent endurance was admired in her time, but today it raises important questions about the cost of leadership under unequal standards. Elizabeth's story reminds us that power does not exist without pressure, and that the burden of being strong can sometimes be as dangerous as weakness. That in the final phase of Queen Elizabeth I's life, fear played a powerful and quiet role. This fear was not only about death itself, but about losing control. Elizabeth had ruled England for more than 40 years by controlling every detail of her image, her court, and her authority. To her, control was safety. Without it, chaos could return. As her health declined, this fear grew stronger. She began to limit who could see her, what could be said around her, and how others treated her. Silence became her shield. By refusing to speak about her illness, she avoided admitting weakness. By refusing medical care, she kept control over her body, even as it failed her. This behavior confused and frightened her attendants. They could see she was suffering, but they were trapped by court etiquette and fear of her anger. No one dared challenge her wishes. In Elizabeth's court, disobedience could mean disgrace or worse. As a result, people watched her decline without intervening. This silence turned her private chambers into a place of quiet despair. The queen, who once commanded attention with words and presence, now communicated through refusal and stillness. She stopped eating properly, not because she didn't feel hunger, but because eating meant acknowledging the body's needs. She stopped sleeping in a bed because lying down symbolized surrender. Standing or sitting upright allowed her to feel in control, even when exhausted. Modern psychology suggests that people facing loss of power often cling to routines that make them feel dominant. Elizabeth's actions fit this pattern closely. Her silence was not emptiness. It was resistance. However, this resistance worsened her physical condition. Dehydration weakened her organs. Lack of nutrition slowed healing. Untreated infections spread. Her breathing grew more difficult as pneumonia took hold. Each day, her body moved closer to collapse. Still, she would not yield. Even in her final hours, Elizabeth left no clear instructions, no farewell speech, and no emotional closure. This absence shocked those around her. They expected final words from a queen known for speeches that inspired loyalty. Instead, she chose silence. This final act reflected her entire reign. Elizabeth controlled not only what people saw, but what they did not see. By denying others access to her decline, she preserved the myth of strength to the very end. Yet this choice made her death lonelier and more painful. No comfort, no reassurance, and no shared understanding softened her passing. Fear of losing authority kept her isolated when she needed connection most. Her final days show how control, when taken too far, can become a prison. Elizabeth ruled England through strength and strategy, but she died surrounded by silence. That silence, more than illness or age, defines the tragedy of her end. It was the cost of a lifetime spent proving that she could never be weak. For centuries, the death of Queen Elizabeth I existed in the space between history and legend. Because no official cause was recorded, people filled the silence with imagination. In an age where poison was feared and political betrayal was common, rumors spread quickly. Some believed Elizabeth had been slowly poisoned by members of her own court to clear the way for James of Scotland. Others believed she chose death herself, refusing food and care as a final act of control. These stories survived because they fit the drama of the Tudor court. The idea of a powerful queen dying quietly from a common illness felt unsatisfying to many. People wanted a grand ending, something worthy of her legendary reign. However, modern research has shown that reality is often less dramatic, but far more painful. When historians and medical experts examined eyewitness reports of Elizabeth's final symptoms, a clear pattern appeared. Her swelling, breathing difficulty, exhaustion, and fever pointed strongly toward severe lung infection. Pneumonia explains her rapid decline, her inability to breathe comfortably, and her extreme fatigue. Combined with heart strain and sepsis, it would have been deadly in the early 17th century. The myths of poisoning also lose strength when examined closely. Poison usually causes sudden and violent symptoms. Elizabeth's decline was slow and uneven, lasting months and even years. Her suffering followed a long pattern of health damage, not a single act of murder. This does not mean her life was free from harm. On the contrary, the damage came from choices made over decades. Lead-based cosmetics weaken her body. Untreated dental infections cause constant pain and likely spread bacteria through her system. Emotional isolation and grief reduce her ability to recover. By the time pneumonia struck, her body was already failing. The truth is not that Elizabeth was killed, but that she was worn down. This understanding makes her death more tragic than any conspiracy. She survived threats that would have destroyed many rulers, but she could not escape time, illness, and the limits of the human body. Separating myth from reality does not make her story smaller. It makes it deeper. Elizabeth was not a victim of assassination. She was a woman who carried the weight of a nation for too long without rest. Her death was not dramatic because her suffering had already lasted years. By understanding this, we gain a clearer view of her strength and her vulnerability. History often turns powerful figures into symbols, forgetting that they were human. The truth about Elizabeth's death restores her humanity. It shows that legends are built on real bodies that age, weaken, and eventually fail. Her life was extraordinary, but her death reminds us that no amount of power can protect someone from pain forever. Even with today's advanced science, there are limits to what can be proven about Queen Elizabeth I's death. Unlike some historical figures, her body was never exhumed for modern testing. There are no preserved tissues, bones, or DNA samples available for direct medical analysis. This means scientists must rely on written records, eyewitness accounts, and knowledge of historical medicine. While this may seem weak compared to modern lab tests, it can still provide strong conclusions when carefully examined. Doctors today regularly diagnose illnesses without physical samples, using symptom patterns and timelines. In Elizabeth's case, those patterns are unusually clear. Reports describe her persistent weakness, difficulty breathing, swelling, fever, and mental withdrawal. These symptoms match severe respiratory infection combined with heart failure. They also align with long-term physical decline rather than sudden poisoning or trauma. Modern toxicology suggests that lead exposure from cosmetics would not cause immediate death, but would slowly damage organs over years. This supports the idea that Elizabeth's body was weakened long before her final illness. Dental infections also play an important role. In Elizabeth's time, tooth decay was common and extremely dangerous. Infections could easily spread to the bloodstream, leading to chronic inflammation. Today, this condition is treatable with antibiotics. In the 17th century, it was a silent killer. When scientists pieced together these factors, a picture emerges of a body under constant stress. However, science cannot measure emotional pain, stress, or grief in the same way. Elizabeth experienced the execution of close allies, betrayal by trusted courtiers, and the loss of nearly everyone she loved. Chronic stress weakens the immune system. Modern medicine recognizes this connection clearly, but cannot quantify it in historical cases. This is where science meets interpretation. Historians must balance medical logic with human experience. They must avoid turning Elizabeth into either a medical case study or a mythical figure. The truth lies between these extremes. Science can explain how her body failed, but not fully why she refused care. That refusal came from belief, fear, and identity. Elizabeth believed she was England. Protecting herself meant protecting the state. Accepting illness meant accepting vulnerability. No test can measure that mindset. Modern science also reminds us of how fragile early modern medicine was. Doctors relied on bloodletting, herbal remedies, and superstition. Treatments often weakened patients instead of helping them. Elizabeth may have sensed this danger and chosen avoidance over intervention. From her perspective, doctors were not saviors but risks. This choice, while understandable, likely sealed her fate. In the end, science gives us clarity but not certainty. It tells us what most likely happened, not what absolutely happened. Elizabeth I's death remains a medical mystery only because evidence was lost to time, not because the cause was unknowable. The real mystery is not how she died, but how she endured as. When Queen Elizabeth I finally died in March 1603, England did not fall into chaos, but the sense of loss was deep and immediate. For more than 4 decades, she had been the center of political life. Many people in England had never known another ruler. Her death marked the end of an era, not just a reign. The Tudor dynasty, which had shaped England through violence, reform, and transformation, ended with her final breath. What followed was a quiet transition of power to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. This peaceful transfer was one of Elizabeth's greatest unspoken achievements. Despite fears of civil war or rebellion, the country accepted the new king. This stability reflected the systems Elizabeth had built during her lifetime. Even in death, her control remained. However, emotionally, the nation struggled. Elizabeth had carefully crafted herself as a symbol of unity and protection. Her image as the Virgin Queen, the Mother of England, had shaped public identity. Losing her felt like losing a guardian. People mourned not just a monarch, but a familiar presence. Poems, sermons, and letters from the time reveal a deep sadness mixed with relief. Relief that her suffering had ended, and fear of an uncertain future. Elizabeth's death also allowed historians to begin re-examining her life more honestly. During her reign, criticism was dangerous. After